that others will be able to join us along the way. It's Christmas time, so we understand that we're trying to squeeze time through. But allow me to take this opportunity to welcome our participants for this particular webinar that is focusing on the launch of the locally led Adaptation Metrics for Africa platform. This is a platform that we, as the Africa Research Impact Network, have basically initiated together with our partners based on long-standing learning and progress with regards to adaptation within Africa. So allow me to welcome you on behalf of the Africa Research and Impact Network to this conversation. As you've heard, my name is Johannes Atela, and I'm the director of the Africa Research and Impact Network. So just to highlight a bit, that Africa Research and Impact Network is committed to strengthening leadership with regards to resilience in the continent. And we are interested, passionate about doing that via, strengthening, profiling the voices of the most vulnerable groups in our communities, because these are the groups that are often targeted by adaptation intervention. Africa Research and Impact Network, as it is a network of over 200 researchers and policymakers, and we are spread across 36 African countries. We have two very unique mandates within the continent. Number one is that we consolidate evidence in the continent in terms of what works and what does not work. So when we talk about resilience or adaptation or locally led adaptation, what are some of the interventions that work and how have they worked? What are some of the success stories that are visible or are found in various African contexts, be it in a local community in Ghana, in a particular peri-urban setting in Nairobi or in Kenya, in a hidden coastal area in Senegal? Some of these evidence on what is working for a long time have not been visible in Africa. So the Africa Research and Impact Network, through our fellowship network, we try to bring these pieces of evidence together and make them much more visible in the decision-making space, but also in the investment space. But at the same time, through consolidating evidence, we are keen to ensure that Africa has a particular positioning in terms of research and development leadership, in terms of certain methodologies, in terms of voicing some of the important things that work within the Africa's context. So we provide that leadership that enables a much more coordinated South-South collaboration that then provides some leadership or thought leadership perspective at the global level. The second perspective that we are involved in as ARIN is that we are a platform for sharing some of the best research and impact practices. And because we do know that research impact is a fundamental part of the R&D discussion in Africa, in line with the Africa's Agenda 2063. But despite this, there hasn't been really very clear, sustainable, and dedicated platforms to be able to showcase areas or opportunities where impact is being felt, to be able to showcase the innovations that are happening in different African contexts. So through providing a peer learning, a convening platform such as the one we are launching today, we are able to make visible some of the, for instance, in the resilience or adaptation space, some of the most promising interventions that then can be picked up by decision makers or can be picked up by investors. And in so doing, we create that visibility and attract support to some of these innovative opportunities. So I want to welcome you again, that you join us in this journey around transforming the research and impact perspective of Africa and rethinking ways in which we can really ensure that the research that is happening is actually creating impact in one way or another. As I conclude, today's session, ladies and gentlemen, is a very critical session for us because we have worked in the adaptation space for quite a long time. And over time, one of the key things that is emerging in the global space or in the different decision-making or investment space is the concern around how to enhance the resilience of the most vulnerable communities. So despite many years of investments in adaptation, despite many years of discussions through the COPs, the Conference of Parties on Adaptation, there hasn't been, there is still a lot of gap in terms of progress in building the resilience of the most vulnerable members of our communities. We're talking about the women, we're talking about the youth, we're talking about the disabled. Today, there are many communities in parts of Africa that are still not even aware that climate change is happening. There are still many communities who are actually not even aware of ways in which they can respond to climate change impacts. Their crops, their farms are being eroded by erratic weather events, but they don't know how to adapt, how to respond to this phenomenon. Even so, there are many communities who do not know or can't access resources for adaptation. Yet all the global discussions around climate action, ambitions after ambitions, are always put in place to respond or to enhance the resilience of these vulnerable communities. So for us as ARIN and partners, we want to rethink this discourse. What is the problem? And this is why we have designed this platform that we are going to showcase today, that we are able to start looking at an opportunity to profile the aspirations, the resilience aspirations, adaptation aspirations of our local communities, and most importantly, the most vulnerable segments of these communities, so that these aspirations can really find their way into decisions, number one, but also can really find their way into investments, that we are able to attract funding that can be able to support adaptation for these vulnerable groups, because we shall have brought out their aspiration, what works and what is promising. And that is why this debate around locally led metrics is very critical. And this comes at a time when we have the concept of locally led adaptation. The way the concept of locally led adaptation has been brought to board, it has not been to some extent locally led process. It has been more locally implemented interventions rather than locally led. So we need to rethink and redefine what do we mean by locally led. For us to make this clear, we must understand the aspirations of the local people, the capabilities, what they bring on board. With that, then we can say an intervention is truly locally led. So we want to have this conversation in a way that we are able to start this dialogue. This platform, the Lama platform, the locally led adaptation metrics platform for Africa, builds on one of our strategic projects that we are implementing currently, called the locally led adaptation metrics project, supported by IDRC and the government of Netherlands, and a program called Step Change. We have a representative from IDRC, that's under the Canadian government, who will actually give us a brief about the vision of the broader program in that sense. So I want to stop there and again take this opportunity to welcome everybody to this discussion. I know it is Christmas time and participants, most of people are running, are already off for holidays, but it is my hope that this conversation that we are starting today will grow to build a very strong community of practice on metrics from a bottom-up perspective. Those very many remarks, I want to stop there, and I don't know whether I should hand it over back to you, Edna, or we just proceed to get the next. What's the next?
We proceed to get to the next session.
All right, so I will basically proceed to invite Marie-Eve Landry from IDRC. Marie-Eve is the program officer in charge of our Lama project, upon which we are anchoring this intervention or this platform. And she will give some remarks with regards to the broader program and the ambitions around it. So Marie-Eve, you are welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Please excuse my voice. I have a bad cold. So it's a privilege to be joining the launch of the Lama platform today. So we're all here today because we know that that adaptation strategies need to be tailored to the specific needs of local communities and properly recognized and supported by adaptation finance. So this is where projects like the locally led Adaptation Metrics in Africa or Lama project and their interactive and learning Lama platform can contribute to our shared ambition to support inclusive and equitable adaptation to climate change in Africa, an ambition shared by the Step Change Initiative and by the International Development Research Center, or IDRC. The Lama platform promises a useful set of metrics and tools to track, evaluate, and improve the effectiveness of adaptation efforts that are designed and implemented by local communities. And it recognizes that communities are best placed to understand the specific challenges they face due to climate change. So we look forward to seeing how ARIN is able to empower communities through this platform by giving them the tools to measure their progress and evidence to advocate for the support they need. We also look forward to seeing how ARIN is able to foster knowledge sharing, learning, and co-creation processes across different stakeholders and contribute to building linkages and informing subnational and global reporting processes with an inclusive and equitable lens. So the Step Change Initiative, which is spearheaded by the IDRC, the International Development Research Center, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands, focuses on accelerating equitable and inclusive locally led adaptation to climate change, particularly in regions vulnerable to climate change like Africa. So the goal is to break the cycle of slow progress in adaptation efforts by closing knowledge to action gaps and creating a step change, a significant scalable improvement in how adaptation is planned, funded, and implemented. So the Lama platform holds the potential to contribute to the ambition of step change in many ways by collecting and analyzing data from local communities. The platform can help gain a deeper understanding of what adaptation strategies are most effective and why. By enabling communities to measure and assess their own adaptation efforts, Lama fosters a sense of ownership and agency among local population. By focusing on outcomes rather than just outputs, the platform can help to highlight the real impact of local communities. And the platform is intended to foster collaboration by creating a shared space where local communities, policymakers, and researchers can work together to monitor adaptation efforts. So by providing the tools to measure, evaluate, and scale locally led adaptation, the Lama platform can contribute towards the transformational shift toward climate resilience that we all know is needed. One that recognizes the power of local communities, emphasizes evidence-based solution, and that accelerate the scaling of adaptation efforts across the continent. I look forward to the rest of this event today and to watching the evolving impact of this platform in the years ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary-Eve, for those valuable comments. We appreciate the role of IDRC through the Canadian government, the role you play in strengthening Southern leadership with regards to not just resilience, but also knowledge. And step change is one such examples where we are having a very strong Southern leadership on issues of inclusive and equitable adaptation within Africa and beyond. So this is very unique, and we do appreciate that support. I want, therefore, to take this opportunity to usher in the number of speeches that will help us to set the scene before we showcase what the platform that we are talking about looks like. So our next speaker is going to give us some critical overview of the adaptation outlook in Africa. Are we making progress in addressing the plights of the most vulnerable members of the local communities in local-led, or is local-led adaptation helping, and what are the challenges? So Professor Cromwell Lukorito, who is the Vice Chair, IPCC Working Group 2, that's adaptation, will give us this speech over the next 10 minutes or so. Professor Lukorito, are you online?
Yes, Dr. Taylor, I'm online. I think it's just timely, still moving from the hospital back on to my place of residence. I've parked somewhere following the opening remarks, and I can be able to throw in a few issues with regard to our interest here. Colleagues, good afternoon, and I'm quite delighted to share this opportunity with us, reflecting on this very important topic, very important subject around adaptation, especially from a locally led perspective, because that is, in my view, where the rubber meets the road. We can talk all these things, including in the global negotiation processes, but the level of action is at the local level. And I want to underscore, to start with, the importance of adaptation, especially in a changing climate, where we are meant to grapple with a challenge which is not static, a challenge which is highly dynamic, and therefore calling for a lot of investment, both in research, in governance, to help us be able to move in tandem with this changing target occasioned by climate change. We know very well that climate change is presenting a lot of extreme weather events, presenting increasing level of climate risks, and therefore complicating any historical approaches that we have used to adapt. That raises a major challenge for us in Africa. Much as we keep saying adaptation is our priority, which is truly so because of the growing risk level from climate change. But I want to say from the outset that adaptation, unlike the sister component of climate action, which is mitigation, is highly complex. It's easier talked, but very difficult to operationalize in the manner in which we are trying to approach it. And therefore, in my view, from the outset, I would want to say that we need very careful approaches, especially towards measuring our adaptation progress. Why so? Because our communities in Africa have been adapting since time immemorial. And we cannot overlook that reality. It is only that in the recent past, the escalated level of manifestations of extremes of weather events, extremes of climate risks appear to overstretch our capacities. And that raises then the question, how are we then investing in adaptation? Are we coming in with replacement approaches, or are we coming in to zero in on the failed portion of our adaptation interventions, which require external input? Most of the time, we are coming in with a view to assuming that we need replacements, which in my view works against the tenets of adaptation, because adaptation has to do with making adjustments within existing human and ecological systems. And if we come in, therefore, with replacement strategies for any community, then I see ourselves getting into a level of disrupting communities from where they have invested cumulatively from time immemorial. And I want to agree with Dr. Taylor that yes, we have been pumping a lot of resources into adaptation, but there isn't much to show that we are really getting there, raising the question as to whether we are doing it right. And in my view, we are not doing it right, because we need to onboard the communities much more than we are doing today. Not just looking at the local level for implementation, but we want to look at the local level for identifying the challenge and proposing solutions. They may not have the capacities required to implement the solutions they think work in their context. But we can come in, therefore, as researchers to be able to provide workable solutions to operationalize whatever they feel over time that this could be able to work. And this, of course, then puts a question also to us as researchers. Is our Africa research agenda really targeting the urgent need of the continent? Or are we coming in with researchers, with the tools, with technologies and the practices which work elsewhere, and try to experiment them on our people with a view to disrupting them from their focus and therefore giving us a window which adds or grows even the risk level to higher levels? So I want to say that yes, we seem to be echoing these locally led issues, but to what extent are we really giving the local level an opportunity to remain in the driver's seat? That I think we need to get an answer and be able to operate in that particular way. Another area which, of course, we have the local communities being more knowledgeable than we scientists, we researchers, is the way that the water scarcity issues, the erratic rainfall patterns, the food insecurities that they are following really arise, and in their own opinion, how this can be worked. So we can actually get solutions from them and use perhaps our financial resources, which of course are lacking at that local level, use of course our technologies and the information that we have through weather forecasting, through early warning system, through climate smart interventions to overlay what their desires are. We know very well that we talk so much about technologies, but how appropriate are they at the local level? Again, remains to be one of the weakest areas that we as scientists are pushing to the local communities. We know at the local community we have solutions, but these solutions can only be operationalized if we give the communities a chance. Look also about our interventions. We also seem to be overemphasizing issues around commercialization at the expense of livelihoods, at the expense of the basic tenets of resilience building, especially in the water management, especially in the food security, among others. These, of course, must be given a front line in terms of the interventions. I know Africa is grappling with limited financial resources, but a lot of money is flowing into the continent in the name of climate action. Are these financial resources targeted? And if so, do we really understand then what the adaptation needs are? If we did it, then I believe the financial resources already flowing into the continent are enough to make a difference. Only if we are trying to deal with what the communities are unable to do, but not going into expensive issues that have to do with the systemic overhauls, systemic changes, which in my view works against the basic principles of adaptation and resilience building. The issue of the weak institutional capacities also needs to be looked into, both at planning level and implementation. How are our institutions interacting with the local level? Are they developing the development agenda informed by the local needs? Or are we again imposing models which work best elsewhere, but not in that particular local context? That we must be able to remember. Finally, with regard to the challenges, which I believe we also need to not forget when we are looking at the Africa's case, is the disparity in wealth and access to resources. This socioeconomic inequality is indeed a major issue which we need to really find out how best we can do that. And the programmatic approaches can better serve this when we listen to the local communities in that regard. So Dr. Atela, I know enough is being done, especially for us to underscore the locally led approaches, which is good, but can we really walk the talk? Whereby let the local level be in the driver's seat, I will emphasize. Then let us come in to provide a support role. The issue of tracking of our adaptation progress is key. Today, if I ask Africa, how much are you adapting? It's a tall order. What remains for you to receive so that you can bridge the gap that you have in adaptation? It is still a challenge for us. And I believe that's where research is required. Because for resilience building, we also must bring in, as I finish, the element of rehabilitation, the elements of repairs in our human and natural system, which really touch on the issue of management of loss and the damage, which are, of course, complementary to adaptation interventions. But if we cannot be able to quantify adaptation, then matters of loss and damage will remain to be a mirage for Africa. Thank you very much, colleagues, for giving me that extended time to pour out a bit of my wild ideas, because we need to domesticate them and see how we build our adaptive capacities and resilience for Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Cromer. Your points are critical key, especially the need to build consensus on a number of things, technologies, financial investments. They need to co-create with local communities so that they can play a central role in the process, because as you rightly say, it's where the rubber meets the bullet. So yeah, very critical point there. And that is where Lama platform squarely sits. I want to bring in Dr. Antonia Faye from Senegal, and who is also the focal point for ARIN within the Francophone region. So Dr. Antonia will give us some reflections on COP29. What were some of the milestones achieved? We know there has been discussions around the global goal on adaptation framework that was established during the COP28 in Dubai. Any insights from that COP, Antonia, please?
Morning. I don't know, afternoon to you. It's still 11. You hearing me?
I can hear you.
Okay. Thank you for inviting me to this event. It's been a long time that we didn't met together, but it's fine. And I want to say hello to my colleague Cromwell, who I assume is traveling, is not on site. Well, to be really short, everyone knows that COP29 was marred in a geopolitical context that was not really favorable for expecting good results, because we have had first the war in Ukraine. We had, it's okay. We had Israel and the Palestinian, and then the elephant is in the room was that we went to Baku just 1 week after Donald Trump was re-elected as the president of the United States. Whoever is following the things know that during his campaign, he has had promised to roll back climate action and take the world's biggest historical emitter out of the Paris Agreement once again, because he did it in 2016, and he wanted to do it again. In fact, the impact of his re-election on the COP29 negotiation and multilateralism more broadly has instantly become a major focus on the global stage. And it was all over whatever was happening in Baku. But the second and the most important was the appointment of an oil producer as the host of a climate summit for the third year in a row, because you must not forget that Egypt also is an oil producer, and COP27 was in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. Then we have had COP28 in Dubai. The United Arab Emirates are probably the most noticeable oil producer. But that has sparked a backlash, because people did minimize the fact, but when we went there, we find out that it was a big mistake. Indeed, the COP29 president in Baku, Azerbaijan, a country that sourced 2/3 of its government revenue from fossil fuel, really faced accusation of conflict of interest and malpractice during the 2 weeks of the meeting. I don't know who was behind all of the things coming out that were pointing fingers on what was wrong into having that meeting there. But recalling that at COP21 in Paris in 2015, when they adopted the Paris Agreement, nations agreed to establish by 2025 what we call the new collective quantified goal on climate finance, the NCQG, to replace the earlier goal of 100 billion that has been agreed in COP15 in 2009 in Copenhagen. That 100 billion was supposed to help developing countries to take action into their climate activities. But as a result, and as everyone knows, COP29 has been labeled as the finance, because climate finance has constantly been one of the most divisive issues in international climate politics. So COP29 didn't escape that, and it's delivered the most disappointing process of negotiation in that issue. We went there with high expectation. Developing country find out at the end that they were compelled to agree to a finance deal that was far beyond their minimum needs, because developed nations use all the tricks that they have had at their hand to agree to help channel just 300 billion year into developing countries by 2035 to support their effort to deal with climate change. Where we were developing country, we were united in calling for developed country to raise at least $1.3 trillion a year in climate finance. The new climate finance goal agreed in Baku has really left us bitterly disappointed. The first things that I have to say as a takeaway. In the end, what the negotiator agreed was on a loser call to raise 1.3 trillion each year from a wide range of sources, including private finance, private investment, and that can be linked to what my colleague Cromwell said, that if we are looking for those guys to agree on what they're going to give us to adapt, then we are good to wait for a long time. And some countries, including India and Nigeria, really accused the COP29 presidency of pushing the deal through without their proper consent following the last minute chaotic negotiation. You needed to be there to see exactly what was the atmosphere and how people were really, you only can be there and look at what's happening, but not having really the strength to go against it or even to change anything. But that was not only the failure of the COP29. There is another one. Country failed to reach an agreement on how the outcome of the COP28 last year global stocktake, including a key pledge to transitioning away from fossil fuel, should be taken forward. Instead, what they did is they just used the rule 16, draft 16 rule to put it forward to COP in Brazil, which is going to be another milestone, because if we don't negotiate during the year, probably in Bonn during the SBI and SAPSA, it's not going to be a good result. Well, but there was something that they been able to manage to agree upon, is the remaining section of Article 6 on carbon market, meaning that all elements now of the Paris Agreement were finalized, probably nearly 10 years after it was signed, but giving like a windows of, you're gonna see how it's going to be, how to be a jam in country for a private company to come to close deal for carbon market. And this is where I think we have to call upon African country to be careful, because that's going to put us really into what they're looking for, is to push us to be into the mitigation side and forgetting about the adaptation. If we do that, of course, you might forget about locally adapted, activity for adaptation. And other than that, anything else that was on the agenda has been put onto the rule 16, into the rule 16. So let's say that for those who are going to be in Belém, in Brazil next year, that's going to be very heavy duties to make sure that we agree upon everything that has been left out. There is nothing else that happened at COP29. We failed on the finance side. We failed on the transitioning away. We failed on the global stock. And those three elements are the biggest one that we have to work on, because everything is going to reorient the discussion on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Antonio. Indeed, your very final comments around the shift towards mitigation and the implication for adaptation is a very important one that needs to be looked into. Otherwise, the ambitions are still being piled up in the COPs. The big question is, what do these ambitions mean for climate action, especially for the most vulnerable members of the communities? And that brings me to my third speaker, Dr. Susanna Fisher from UCL. We work with Susanna on one project known as Accountable Adaptation, and we're asking a big question: whose metrics count in decision making? And on this, I want to bring Susanna to talk to us about, just pick it from the COP, any progress on adaptation that she noted at the COP, and more specifically, thinking about the global goal on adaptation, whose metrics counts in that particular framework? Where is the local communities in that conversation? Over to you, Susanna, and nice to see you.
Thank you very much, Jonas, and thank you, ARIN, for this invitation. After these two brilliant introductions from our speakers so far, I think I wanted to just throw in a few kind of overarching reflections. So picking up on what we've talked about so far, that of course we have now in place the UAE framework for global climate resilience agreed in Dubai. So we have a kind of overarching picture of where adaptation should be going in the next decade. And I know that colleagues on this webinar at ARIN are also involved in the kind of ongoing process of working to the detail on that. Like, what do the indicators look like? What are experts going to propose for the kind of 100 detailed indicators of what that framework should look like? And I think if we just zoom out perhaps from the international politics of all that, we might ask ourselves, well, how will this kind of global activity actually affect what goes on locally and what we're actually talking about today, the local platform for local metrics? And I think what we see in areas of other development frameworks is that these kind of big global ideas can set the norms. So they can set ideas of what adaptation is. You know, we've seen that with the Sustainable Development Goals, that they've framed what a particular vision of development is. So I think what we can expect to see is that the global goal will trickle down a little bit locally in terms of how people are thinking about and funding adaptation and what they think good adaptation might look like. So I think it's important to keep in mind as we work with these global frameworks to think about the things that they do for different actors in the chain who are working on adaptation and how we can use that in ways that kind of incentivize stronger action and ambition. I think the last thing I wanted to say specifically on the global goal is I think we've seen over the negotiations on this over the last few years an interesting tension between everybody understanding that we need local level metrics, we need to be really specific about adaptation, it's context driven, but also that desire for an aggregated picture and a global snapshot of progress. And I think we've seen that tension playing its way out over the last few years, and I don't think it's been fully resolved. And so perhaps this platform will be part of kind of trying to marry up that top-down approach that is essential to a UN process and a kind of bottom-up flow of evidence that is needed on something like adaptation. The other two quick points I wanted to make was firstly just thinking about the challenges of adaptation measurement more broadly. It's, you know, been widely kind of seen in the research literature and then coming now into kind of policy and politics to be really, really hard to do. And that's because there are a number of challenges around adaptation. It's something that's long term. The climate hazards are shifting as an intervention is played out. So what might seem like a good idea at the beginning could potentially shift if the climate changes in unexpected ways or things happen faster than expected. It's increasingly been raised that occasionally adaptation can be maladaptive, and that's obviously something that needs to be kind of worked through and made sure not only for people where an adaptation intervention is happening, but also those in the surrounding areas, that risk isn't transferred from one area to another. And I think local adaptation is also fundamentally a question about what people want for their future. And that may be the same as what's been before, or people may be looking for something different if the climate changes in very particular ways. So the idea of what success might mean for a community in a different location might also change over time. And then the last point I wanted to make was thinking about what are local metrics for, and how might the platform that ARIN is developing kind of support those different ways of thinking about metrics. So I think with the idea of the global goal in mind, we can think that metrics are partly for accountability, they're for tracking, they're for knowing what's happening and knowing where progress is happening. And as Jonas flagged, that knowledge is certainly lacking in the African continent and elsewhere. So that's a really important function. But there are other functions as well, such as, for example, learning, and local-led metrics are often more about, what's happening in this specific place, and is it the right thing for these people at this time, and how might they do things differently if it's not working as well as they hoped. So those would be really important lessons to be able to transfer between different similar contexts, so people can learn about what's worked well and what's not, and also what metrics have captured those changes so that others can try and use them. And I think linked to that idea of learning is this idea of accountability, like who are people accountable for, who are adaptation projects accountable for, and perhaps a platform like this can help increase those ideas of accountability and make it more visible and transparent about what's working and what's not. So I think just to conclude then, I think there's a really important role for local metrics within the global frameworks that we see emerging, but not just feeding up into the global frameworks, but also helping to challenge what's in there, making sure that the evidence base is diverse and making sure that ideas of adaptation are also constantly changing and responding to what people are actually needing and saying as they experience adaptation on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Susanna. I think the idea around accountability and how that accountability works for different groups, I think is very critical. And it brings in the debate around, really what makes sense, even for the local people. There's a bit of complexities around that, but most importantly, your point around really rethinking who we are working for when it comes to adaptation metrics and how to marry the different interests is a complex conversation that Lama will try to do, but indeed requires a lot more of goodwill as well. So thanks so much for those critical points. At this juncture, I do recognize the presence of Frederick Mokua from UNFCCC, whom we've been also working with quite closely on the issue of bringing in local metrics into the UNFCCC and DGA process. And also, I recognize the presence of Kenya's adaptation lead at the Ministry of Environment in Kenya, Mr. Lenteren, whom we've worked with quite closely. And, these are the key clients for the Lama platform. I want to, before I give the two any opportunity to say something, I wanted us to go straight into understanding what this Lama platform brings on board. Before that, I wonder whether there's any burning question from any participants with regards to some of the insights that have been raised by the three speakers. Okay. I'm trying to see if there is any burning questions or comments on that. Right, as everyone is still digesting, I think it's now a good moment to just showcase what we intend to do with the Lama platform. What is the idea about? What do we want to achieve? And what do we see as the contribution that this platform brings on board? And with that, it's my pleasure to bring in the ARIN team that has been working on this. We have Charles, we have Humphrey, and we have Gogo, as well as Awino, who have been collectively working on the platform. In the next maybe 20 minutes, maybe you could just take us through what this platform is all about and what do we intend to achieve from it, so that we can have participants giving their feedback on its value. Over to you. I don't know, Charles, whether you're the one starting or who. If you're the one, take it up.
Yes, thank you so much, and thanks a lot for the delegates present. we have really sacrificed, considering now we are on holiday and it's Friday, but you have shown really the passion to really look at what's happening at the different levels. We amplify the voices of the vulnerable. So there are quite a number of actors. Of course, there are more. We have not included in the slides, but there are more actors who have been part of this conversation, like the CDKN, the Adaptation Consortium in Kenya, and also quite a number from our fellows who are representing, our fellows are representing across sub-Saharan Africa, whom we have consulted in terms of how can we really develop a digital and interactive platform really to amplify the locally led adaptation metrics. But for those who are new to the discussions, because we have shared quite widely, at COP28, there was a decision that we really emphasize on the co-production of metrics and indicators, particularly at the macro levels, but more importantly, looking at also local level, and we look at that it emphasized that adaptation action should be continuous, iterative, and progressive, and be based on and guided by the best available science, which Professor Lukorito is representing Africa in the IPCC, that is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, Working Group 2, and then also including through use of science-based indicators and metrics. And that one now also helps us in terms of the thinking around the complexities which have been discussing over the last several conference of parties meetings. But also more importantly is really acknowledging the local knowledge systems and also locally led and community-based adaptation. Now, to operationalize that at the COP28, which was held in Dubai, the United Arab Emirates, then there was a resolution to have what we call the UAE Pelem. Pelem is a city in Brazil that is going all the way to COP 2030, work program on indicators for measuring progress achieved towards the targets under the UAE framework for global climate resilience. Now, there are targets, including both, if you look at this infographic from UNFCCC, which I think Mokwa will also expound on it, we have got the targets, what we call the thematic targets, and then also the dimensional targets. And now, this 2-year program on indicators has actually been bringing together quite a number of actors. The UNFCCC consolidated global indicators recently, and we thank the African Group of Negotiators and the UNFCCC for nominating ARIN, where we have been sitting and contributing and shaping the discussions in the review of the close to 9,000 indicators which were submitted. And maybe one of the key lessons that I've learned from the process is that we have got more indicators at the global level. It means now, as we come to the national, the sub-national level, and the community level, then we are expecting more than that, because so far we have been working with 2,000 indicators only, and more sub-national governments and local communities across Africa, and considering the heterogeneity, the ecosystems, the wetlands, and the different cultures and traditions, and especially when you come to the granular level, where you are getting more specific. Now, where is the local communities and the vulnerable communities positioned is when the global community really agreed on the locally led adaptation framework and the principles. And these principles actually have been acknowledged in the national and the global adaptation programs, which they are looking at really, they have developed the key to deploy, especially at the sub-national level. We can look at the different programs now, looking at local climate action. But what are some of the principles which LLA promotes and really embedded, that needs to be embedded within the climate action, particularly on decision-making, which is the first principle, is devolving to the decision-making to the lowest appropriate level. So meaning that when you're having the conversation, or when you are looking at now the need to move from discussing complexities around indicators to developing meaning, that we have to really involve the local communities, and such programs like the Adaptation Consortium, they've really demonstrated in terms of supporting also development of subnational climate change finance frameworks, and also a number of programs across Africa. Now, what are some of the gaps again that we face or we see, and we have already been discussing also, especially in the UAE PLM work program and also at COP28, and of course over the past COPs, is that Africa is still marked gray in data. And if you can see from the our world in data, indicators, accessing the indicators from the public documents and the private sector-led documents, and also is also not easy as such. Of course, they are the national determined contributions, which we have actually used. We have got also the national climate change action plans, and then also the subnational action plans. But now, when it comes especially to the local level, and of course also at the multi-level, you see that data that reflects or that captures those indicators or indicators and their data, which can really support in terms of assessing those indicators and qualifying them as indicators for locally led action, is still quite limited. And then also the other gap is the absence of consolidated or dedicated bottom-up or community-led frameworks and metrics. For those who have been really looking at especially the climate vulnerability assessment, there is a database which has close to 719 frameworks which have actually been piloted under projects, but now going beyond project period becomes a challenge, because again, our context, we are largely donor funded. And then also the other challenge is they are quite scattered in different databases. Different organizations have got different frameworks, and really putting them together to really assess in terms of, are they really locally produced, or can they be leveraged to the local communities to build on, is also quite a challenge. But of course, they have made substantive effort. Now, what is the rationale for co-production of locally led metrics? One is to facilitate alignment of the priorities of diverse social groups. And here we are talking about also engendering the process, looking at the different gender groups, and then their interests, their cultures and traditions. And then also looking at also policy and investment opportunities. Are the adaptation programs currently being run in Africa really more profit-oriented, or looking at the at those social goods which can really empower the community in terms of adaptation? And then also supporting measuring and reporting the effectiveness of LLA in addressing the intersectional vulnerability. Here we are talking about, again, in terms of are the subnational governments, even though we have the subnational government taking also the lead, are they reporting? Where do we have the comprehensive, inclusive reporting framework, which I think Mr. Lerenten, who's representing the adaptation at the national level, will also expand on that. And then again, the measurements. So also we're looking at linking lessons learned to the national adaptation plans, national determined contribution, and there is a great opportunity considering 2025, the national determined contributions will be revised. And then again, the conversation on consolidating the global metrics for global goal on adaptation. Of course, what we have looked at so far in the indicators for GGA that have been consolidated, they are more output oriented. But for Africa, we are looking at the process, the input, the outputs, and also the impact, because where the impact now is where we are also very interested, and that is where the communities are really quite interested. So these are some of the sources of data that we have used. So at the COP28, UNFCCC invited us for a session, and that is where we and Moko actually from the UNFCCC advanced that invitation, and it became an opportunity for us to reflect in terms of what are the kind of databases that we need to really look at, and then we build on. So we have looked at up to the local level. For instance, in Kenya, they've developed what we call the county integrated development plans, but they've moved further in terms of developing the county climate change action plan. So I think that one set a very good example in Africa, considering also Kenya was the first one to develop the climate change law. And then again, we have looked at the relevant projects, for instance, the locally led adaptation metrics, where we have adopted its methodology to really access metrics at the local level. We have looked at also other platforms, Global Up on locally led adaptation, that is by the Global Center on Adaptation, the Resilience Platform, South Galaxy, Adaptation Dashboard, and also the multilateral development banks. And what we have looked at to our interest was to look at the locally led biasness, and we have learned some lessons in our moving forward. So what are the relevance of the Lama dashboard? One is to facilitate equity and inclusivity, and I think our previous speakers, they've actually expounded. But here we are being biased in terms of capturing and amplifying the voices of the vulnerable communities and the various gender groups, especially in a very complex, heterogeneous ecosystems in Africa, and especially sub-Saharan Africa. And then also, secondly, is the demonstration of effectiveness of the LLA practices. And this one is particularly to simplify, not to really, complicate, but actually to simplify the presentation of some of the LLA solutions which are produced by the different actors. So different adaptation actors in Africa, and also we're working in Africa, you'll be able to really access and also incorporate and also facilitate linkages to the different databases that you are really leading, and also developing an interactive page whereby it will be just about clicking and really providing the overlay, which Professor Lukorito actually mentioned. He brought the concept of overlaying the indicators. And that is because there is a challenge to find the national indicators differently, the subnational, the global indicators, but then overlaying on one page is also what we are really we have looked at. And also tracking and reporting. We are looking at now really shaping using this tool, especially the reporting framework from the local communities. For instance, in Kenya, I think they've moved to the granular level in terms of looking at what we call beyond the county, that is the subnational government. Then we have got what we call the sub-counties, and then we have got the ward level, the villages, and the households. So the ward level, they've got what we call ward climate committees. So we should be able to really facilitate and really do the reporting, which is relevant also or aligned with the national adaptation framework. And then also facilitating sharing and learning. And this one is something also Africa we really need to really accelerate. And of course, there are many platforms, and we are going to really engage all of you and really facilitate that in a very simple and palatable format, because some concepts or the way ecosystems are defined by different communities also, there are some differences, and it's good to really provide that glossary. So let me hand over to Kogo, who is also one of our technical teams who have been really spearheading the prototype. And we welcome your inputs, especially shaping now towards also launching or sharing at COP30. Thank you very much, and welcome, Kogo. Let me stop this one so that you can share from your side. It becomes very easy to scroll through the slides. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. So as we are going to the demonstration, I would like to request participants to drop any suggestions, questions, or comments from the chat section. I'd like to hear your thoughts, because this is a challenge. It's a problem that is having multiple dimensions. So your thoughts would be very useful in shaping the ideas. Gogo, if you're ready on team, go ahead.
Thank you once again. I'm going to do this in two parts. First of all, we're going to look through the overview, then for 5 minutes, and then later afterwards, we are going to demonstrate on the live platform to see how this interplay. First of all, this is the overall outlook of the Lama additional platform. The that is the URL to enable us access, and that's how our homepage is. So this is the website is what houses the dashboard. So from the website we can see if I go to the next slide, you can see different components that has. So from the components, well, just number one, we have the dashboard that will house the interplay between the different indicators that my colleague Charles was talking about. And then the LLA interventions, where this is trying to compare the different interventions from other projects and how that relates to the indicators from Lama and other interventions as well. Also, our previous speakers have talked about the tools and frameworks repository. And then as well, we have the stakeholders that are going to be involved in this field, also talking to each other. This is where the sharing and the platform is enabled to pick up. And lastly, the metrics group, that this is the experts group that will talk about this. So this is what we are going to do in the 3 and 5 sections. So the first section of the interactive dashboard, this is how the overlay looks like, and where we have interplay within these two. So this is where we are trying to achieve the visualization, the analysis, and the interaction. At the same time, the interventions, number 2 component is the interventions that we are trying to compose. We are trying to see the components are being housed in the projects and initiatives that are implemented across. And then we're also going to see examples of the tools and repository. At the same time, I've also talked about the stakeholders engagement platform together with the metrics group. So without wasting time, I'm going to share the live page so that we can able to see clearly as we go through the components one by one. So let me start here and share the exact live demonstration now. On the live demonstration, I'll be assisted by my colleague, Dr. Humphrey, to help us go through each individual components as we talked about. So this is our landing page. Like I said, you can see the cursor and follow through. If I go to the next tab, I can able to see the components that I was talking about that are being explained, were being highlighted before on the slides. So I just invite my colleague, Dr. Gaby, to start us through from the first one. And I'm going to display the first one, which is the intervention database that you already have. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Gogo. Thank you very much, Charles, also. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. Indeed, this Lama platform, as we are developing it, it is a continuous process. And when you look at this particular interface, it clearly shows the adaptation intervention databases. These are interventions that already have been implemented in Africa. And when you look at it, these interventions have been implemented in different thematic areas: agriculture and food security. We have water security and management, nature-based solutions, among others. But when you focus on Africa, for example, when you click on, for example, Kenya, when you look at Kenya, that shows some of the interventions that already have been implemented in Kenya. So when you click on a number of countries, it clearly shows those are interventions that already have been implemented, but this process of mapping them is still ongoing. And then when you go to the next, when you go down, just scroll down. When you look at it now, keenly, you find that now at the top bottom left, those are the number of interventions already that we have mapped in each of the countries. And then next, this one just shows the amount of the thematic budget, that is the investments in terms of money that has been invested in different thematic areas in different countries. This clearly shows already interventions are going on, but the question is then, have those interventions been effective? And number two, the question is, have the aspirations of the local communities been considered in even implementing those particular interventions? When you move down, you find that also we have been able to capture even the different donors that have been actually investing their money in different adaptation interventions. And it clearly shows that these interventions has been in form of grants, in form of loans, among other interventions. When you go to the next now interface, that is, we have frameworks and tools. It shows that also we have been able to map the existing frameworks and tools. And the essence of this is that we have begun from none on what is existing. And then from there, we have also been able to identify that the biasness in a way that then the local communities, the aspirations or the involvement of local communities has not really been effective. And that is now the entry point of this Lama project, where the Lama platform is a subset or is an output of this project that is being implemented, that is trying to bring in the element of the bottom-up approach, where the communities are going to be involved in the co-production of metrics and indicators which are going to be effective, because now the communities are going to also have a say in how the climate change have affected them, and they are going to suggest ways in which maybe interventions should be implemented so that then they are able to cope with the effects of climate change. When you look at this particular now interface, it shows the frameworks and tools already that exist. And these framework and tools exist in different also thematic areas. And also they have been also developed by different agencies. Here we are looking at FAO, we are looking at UNFCCC, we are looking at World Bank, so they already exist. For example, when you look at thematic area, just let us look at agriculture, for example. When you click on agriculture as a thematic area, then you will find that there exist already frameworks that are there. And these frameworks, it shows also the initiator of this framework, the sector, among other things. And this then, from here, now we go on and now we look at now at the community level, what has happened. And this now takes us to the next now interface, whereby we were able to even engage a number of communities in a number of meetings, that we were able to also develop a number of, or come up with a number of metrics and indicators that we were trying to co-create in some of the co-creation workshops. So I will invite Gogo to continue from there.
Thank you very much, Dr. Agevi. As you have mentioned, this is where we were trying to compile and see the interconnection between the indicators. So there are various levels of connections between the indicators themselves, the indicators on their subsections, or whether they are global until the granular level, which is the local, as my colleague Charles was talking about. And then again, remember, this is a still ongoing work, and it's not conclusive. This will continue being updated and more indicators will be shared. And then the next tab displays the various sectors that these indicators belongs to, and also the geographical aspect, where we see that if we're talking about Charles said the sources of data that the database that we scoped as either national adaptation plans or national climate change adaptation so action plans, the CIDPs, and even the local indicators that were obtained from community scoping during the project phase. And lastly, what I'm going to show is the interconnectivity or interplay of all these combined, so that somebody who's using the dashboard can able to see what is a how local, how does that interplay with the global, and can we have something that can communicate, can share, can able to have this information from different levels, whether it's to compare levels, to compare the extent as in whether the geographical extent or different sectors. So this is the interplay, and from this I'm going to invite Dr. Agevi again to because there are some examples of data that was scoped, so that is can able to see why Lama and why we want to concentrate on the dashboard and on the local indicator. So I'm going to stop share the platform and invite Dr. Gavi on some of the findings from the scoping. So let me just share the last slide so that Dr. Gavi can pick it up from there.
As Gogos shares the last slide, I just wish to also re-emphasize that the focus of Lama platform is basically on the community level indicators. And because we are conscious that there are already a number of indicators at different levels that have been built, what we want to do is to co-create local indicators and also learn from existing interventions. How are they measuring resilience or adaptation progress? And then build that collective co-creation to be able to compare with what is existing at the different higher levels. So it is important to understand that Lama's focus is to build a more bottom-up perspective and voices with regards to the indicators in a way that profiles the aspirations, the voices, and impact, adaptation impact successes at the local level. And with that, then we hope that these innovative opportunities and aspirations can get their way into the decisions at the national level, at the GGA level, and most importantly, can also be used as a way of enhancing in investments in the local actions. So I'll let Dr. Gavi proceed with that.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just as my colleague has explained, that even as we have continued to develop this particular platform, the platform will be encompassing all these particular indicators and metrics, that is from the global, that is those that were mined from the SDGs, and then at national level, those that were obtained from the national adaptation plans. And at the subnational level, that is where we focused on the CIDPs and the county climate change adaptation plans. And from this, then the scoping that we have done, and also from the co-creation, initial co-creation meetings that we have had, it is evident that these particular indicators, we have those indicators that are at the input level, and we have those indicators that are what we call enablers, and we have those indicators that we call the outputs. And when you look at it clearly, then you find that the local indicators that then are as a result of the co-creation and that involved the communities, most of them actually are at the enabler stage. But those at the global or at the national level, and then they are biased towards the output. But it is very critical that even as we are developing these metrics, we start from the input stage and also who or which are the enablers. And once we have these, then being the majority, then it will be effective even in trying to measure, in trying to also quantify the impact of the adaptation interventions that are being implemented. And when you look at now that particular table, those are just examples of those indicators where we have those indicators that are either enablers or inputs or outputs at the different levels. Next. And from this, some quite a few learnings we have gathered, and we have gathered that when you look at the local indicators, of course, they focus more on enablers and processes. But the global ones, the national ones, they focus on the outputs. The national indicators are widely influenced by the global indicators, while those at the subnational ones are influenced by the national ones. But then quite critical here is the weak linkage between the local and the global indicators. This is where that linkage needs to be strengthened, because most of the discourse on indicators are at global level, and that is what is also currently guiding the issue of the investment in terms of how much is being negotiated even at the COP meeting. But now the Lama is coming in by bringing in the communities and involving them, and this is what is going to even strengthen that linkage by ensuring that even as we negotiate for these investments, then we are bringing in or incorporating the aspirations, the suggestions of the local communities. And this would imply that any investment or any money that is being put in a particular adaptation intervention, then is being used effectively by the different institutions and also by those particular communities. Thank you very much. Back to Charles.
Thank you, Humphrey. Charles, do you have some concluding remarks?
Yes, I think there is a space which Kogo demonstrated in terms of enabling the global, the national, and the subnational and the local indicators where you can now overlay them. I think that is a space that is the main target to really improve on. And if time still allows, maybe Kogo can go back and really show in terms of when you click, for instance, agricultural sector-based indicators, it you are able to see select at the global level and the national, the subnational, and the local level. And even from this page, you will see that why the infographic or the presentation from the local level, subnational level is quite long, is because there are more indicators and they are getting more granular and specific as you go to the local community level. Yes, so that is the page whereby you will be able to really look at the indicators which you have mined from especially the national adaptation action plans, and also the NDCs, and then also at the sub-national level. And then you can now select from the tabs, you can select one sector and look at the indicators, how they are really framed. Yes, that is good. So you see now, for instance, at the NAP, if you are focusing on, for instance, agriculture, look at the national, the global level, the national level, and then at the sub-national level, there are more indicators and also they become more specific. Those some, especially at the sub-national level, again, they are still broader because of there is need to refine them. So those are some of the capacities that are really required as you go down to the sub-national level. Now, when it goes to the local level, if you can scroll, just move to the local level. Yes. So when you move to the now more local level, you realize that some indicators are already captured at the sub-national level and then also at the national level. And our experience also recently, when you are discussing as experts under the UAE PLM work program on indicators, there are some indicators which are really still broad, but also some are more specific. And the question, which I think I can also pose to the delegates here, is the question around manageability of global indicators. If we are going to conclude the next year, the global indicators, then where are we going to place especially these specific indicators? Because there is a provision that the local actors and the local indicators have to be really captured. So yeah, that is my, I think my key question to the delegates to respond and also help us in terms of shaping and then also mining as more specific indicators at the local level as possible, and then we share for the platform. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Charles. Very critical that the focus here is to have those spaces for co-creation and to usher in local voices in the metrics discussions at different levels. And to do that, we work with communities at the local levels to co-create those indicators, also learn from a range of interventions that are taking place within the continent. And that's why we need to have an idea about these interventions. The stakeholder engagement component of the platform will mainly support the conversation in terms of sharing some of these best practices indicators being used at the local level that have actually demonstrated impact and success. So it's an ongoing process, quite complex, but the gist is for us to build the bottom-up aspirations and link into the other, compare with the other indicators of the different platforms. At this juncture, there are a number of questions in the chat. I think we've been trying to respond to this, but we would like to continue hearing your thoughts, because this is work in progress, and we want to engage all our partners, all our participants in shaping this particular agenda in a way that is going to make the platform very valuable to the different stakeholders, the governments, the UNFCCC, the local communities. So this is our passion with the platform. At this juncture, I want to just invite Dr. Maria Nantongo, if she's in the call, so that she can just moderate a very short panel conversation, a feedback panel on the dashboard or the platform that has been presented. What do you see as the critical value in this ecosystem, and how can this value be strengthened and be enhanced? We are happy to hear the thoughts from different people. Dr. Maria is our ARIN's focal point for East Africa. As I said, ARIN has regional focal points. We have West, East, South, and the Francophone and diaspora Francophone. So Maria is in charge of the East African region and also a lecturer at Makerere University in Uganda. Maria, the floor is yours to take up the panel conversation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Taylor, and thanks to all my colleagues that have brought us this far. Like Dr. Taylor said, I want to, at this juncture, welcome our panelists. I think I saw them on call, who is Shushi Vora from the Global Resilience Partnership, and then Carl Schulz from the International Platform for Adaptation Metrics, IPAM. You're both very welcome. Yeah, I can see you, Carl. Is Vora here? Okay. I think I had seen her, but we probably, yeah. Okay. So I think at this point, we really have a broad overview of how what the platform is and how it works and the amount of work that has gone in. And also we've seen that the Lama platform does not come in a vacuum. There is other work that has been done. But we want to understand from our panelists, given their experience, especially at the global space in these discussions, from their view, what do they see is the added value of the Lama platform? And perhaps how could we even strengthen it more to better serve the interests of the different stakeholders to which a platform like this could serve? Thank you so much, Carl, for coming. I didn't introduce you properly, so you could first of all introduce yourself in detail. Sure. And then go on to your answer.
As Carl comes in, Mary, I want to bring to your attention about other panelists, Mukua from UNFCCC and Leren Teren, to give a perspective from the national level.
Okay, okay. And is that Frederick? You could introduce them as well.
Frederick Mukua, yes.
Okay. Frederick, you're very welcome. After Carl, you will take the stage as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mary. So I'm Carl Schulz, chair of the International Platform on Adaptation Metrics. The IPAM is a member-led organization of nearly 150 experts focused on making sense of adaptation through metrics. We span all sorts of continents and countries. We also represent a variety of different institutional members, including ARIN. It's a very key core member on our steering committee. So our fundamental aim is to make sense of adaptation through metrics and understand the ways that we can do a better job of integrating these into decision-making. So it was really helpful to listen to all of the previous talks, which I think gave me a better idea over how Lama really fits within this ecosystem here. And so I just make a few points here. Dr. Lucarito made very clear a few points, and a few of the ones that I'd like to capture would be that adaptation is complex, if not wicked, and it's dynamic, and the solutions need to be dynamic. Dr. Fisher indicated, amongst many other good insights, that global decisions oftentimes, and global metrics and things that happen at the global level oftentimes do impact what happens locally, and it should be the case. Dr. Fay talked about how at the COP it wasn't a wonderful success. In particular, there were failures across a lot of things related to how the vulnerable are going to be empowered through money, through capacities. So in light of that, in light of the fact that none of us here, I believe, are smallholder farmers who are directly involved, but rather, what are we here for? We are here to help provide information, analysis to support decision making. I think that's really critical if we're going to address these issues. And a lot of what is necessary, I think, is making a better sense of adaptation. The Lama project, as I understand it now, I think has a very helpful role in particular, reflecting local metrics. And I've seen now, Charles and his colleagues have shown how the indicators at the local level, already we have an insight that they're different from global in many respects, but of course there's relationships between them. Well, I think that it's important that we directly address this issue and that we have a platform that provides that information that can support decision-making for specific purposes at the local level. The other thing that has been mentioned is that this is looking to support the locally led adaptation principles. And I think that's very important, that questions of equity, questions of representation, and questions of local empowerment are very critical if we're going to be successful at addressing the vulnerability of those who are facing greater climate impacts right now. And currently, although there are over 100 signatories to the LLAP, these principles, there's no real reporting framework for this. Nobody is saying, well, I've signed up and now I have to submit a report, right? And perhaps that's okay. However, I think to the extent that we can be looking at how information, metrics, indicators, and learning from that, trying to make sense of that, I think is going to be very critical if we're going to do a better job of decision making at the local level. So I would just reflect that amongst all of the different platforms out there at different levels, that if Lama plays a useful role, it would be, I think, at informing the decision making and providing the information to create stories so that filtering up to the global level, there's going to be a more compelling set of evidence, stronger narratives, and also greater clarity over where our emphasis should be. And so, given that Africa faces so many climatic challenges, especially related to the impacts of climate change, if Lama can effectively provide that information to make the narratives, it will help both in terms of making decisions at the local level, but also telling the story that can empower people at the local level through global resources conveyed. So I'd say those are a few things that I think are very interesting about how Lama can play a role in this broader ecosystem.
Thanks, Carl. Thanks so much. I also am informed that we have Mr. Thomas Laurenten. Thomas, you're also very, very welcome. So we heard from you, Carl, about how Lama could build the stories from the bottom up and be able to create a stronger case, especially at the global level. I like that idea very much because many times it's really difficult to know and also gauge if what we are doing at the higher level really speaks to what is required at the local level. And perhaps Lama, we can do quite well if we can do that. Thank you so much, Carl. I now want to bring in Frederick. Yes, Fred, you're welcome. Kindly introduce yourself and just take on the same question.
Okay, thank you so much. My name is Frederick Mokwa. I work for the UNFCCC. I've been working for the UNFCCC for 2 years, and I'm really grateful to ARIN because they have always responded to our invitations, and we are working together in this work. And first of all, I have to say this is really amazing work that you have done, and the presentation is really great. It really fits directly to what we are doing. To start with, I briefly talk about the GGA, then what we are doing, and how what ARIN is doing, or the Lama is really supporting our work. On the GGA, actually, all hope is not lost about the negotiations on adaptation. It's work in progress because you know that adaptation is really a very complex work to measure. So it's really taking a long time in negotiations, and that's why we are lagging behind the mitigation part. So from COP29, of course, we have talked about the Berlin framework, and we have also talked about the UAE framework that was started in COP29. But in COP28, COP29, we have the Baku adaptation roadmap that really fits directly into what will come up from the other work that has been done on adaptation. So basically looking at the work that Lama is doing or ARIN is doing, this actually fits directly with the aspiration of the Baku roadmap. If you can look at it, it's an available document. It covers exactly what you're doing. So for me, I think you are ahead of time. And of course, it's a best practice for many and most of us to learn from you because you have already developed the dashboard and collected the data. And of course, I think it's going to be really a great lesson for everyone globally. And also there is the Baku high-level program, dialogue that was established from COP29 that's going to handle issues of political issues in the implementation of adaptation and the GGA. So GGA negotiation continues actually. Most likely it will continue beyond COP30. So coming back to what we are doing, we have a project that we are doing with the non-party stakeholders, basically looking at the various metrics and taxonomy challenges that we have in measuring adaptation so that we can have clear data on tracking the progress of implementation of climate action on resilience and adaptation. And the main challenge, of course, has been institutional arrangements, which, of course, having ARIN working in Africa is partly solved because we are also working with the other organizations in Asia. And it's a work that we have already started to contextualize adaptation to the regional level so that we can be able to address how adaptation is really felt locally. The other challenge that we want to solve in this project is, of course, on data and tools. Right now, everyone comes up with their own taxonomies, metrics that fits their work. And all this actually need to be harmonized or aggregated to give the global scope on adaptation. So I think the main challenge has been collecting this and aggregating this from the top level. It's really difficult. We have to start from the local level and aggregate it upwards. So what ARIN is doing through the Lama, I think it's really appreciated, and it's what we really want to learn from. Also, we are developing the aggregation framework. So it really does not, it's not really a major problem. Of course, I know Charles asked that question about what's going to happen with the indicators that are being developed locally. Of course, we need an aggregation framework where we can be able to translate the indicators that are developed locally to give the global scope. Of course, there is interest to reduce the indicators from 9,000 or 9,000 plus to not more than 100. But that one would only give the global scope. But at the regional and also national level, you can still use the same indicators, but we have a framework of translating your indicators to the global level scope or outlook. The other thing that we are doing is we are linking geospatial applications, that's GIS, to monitoring and tracing adaptation. In as much as we are tracking progress, we also want to trace where action is being implemented and where the vulnerable communities are. And I think those questions are already answered through the ARIN. So that's why I say it's really a learning process that is going to be scaled globally from what the ARIN has already done. Yeah, the other thing on the outputs, how you have scaled down your indicators in terms of outputs, inputs, outcomes, impacts. They are the same things as we are looking at. So I really appreciate. Maybe the only thing that is additional to the sectors is the systems, which I did not see, and also like linking the adaptation actions to risks. Yeah, so otherwise, everything that you are doing is really what we are interested in. So it's a great opportunity for us to learn from you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Frederick. You really highlighted there the key strength of our work. Thank you for pointing those out to the audience, but also pointing us to what we can do to add on to what you're already doing at the IPCC. We are happy to know that we are already contributing in a similar way, and there's a lot of synergies in the work that we are doing and that you're already doing. Thanks for that. So now I'd like to bring on Mr. Thomas Laurentien, who is the lead of adaptation at the Ministry of Environment, Climate Change and Forestry in Kenya. Thomas, are you here?
Good afternoon, colleagues. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. Yes, we can hear you, Thomas.
Okay.
You can go ahead and introduce yourself, and then just help our audience understand what is the value of the Lama platform in enhancing devolved climate action. Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon again, and I'm Laurentien Lelequitien, a Deputy Director in charge of climate change adaptation. And I really like to appreciate the work done by ARIN on this, because this is an area that globally we have a gap in terms of measuring adaptation and resilience. And there are a lot of work going on. I'm part of the negotiators also for the global goal on adaptation, right from COP26 when we decided to have it on the table for discussions and to see how to operationalize the GGA that was left out for 6 years. As you know, of the Paris Agreement goals, the global goal on adaptation was left behind. So in terms of the progress, we have had some good progress, and that's why from last year, through the UAE Global Resilience framework, we are now discussing the UAE BLM work program on indicators. And from SB 60, that's June this year, we have had a clear roadmap of having experts coming in to look at the targets that were in the UAE decision. So so far, the experts have done some good work, and also the adaptation committee, we have around 9,000 indicators, both from the submissions of parties and the adaptation committee. And then in COP29, we were able to make some further progress by providing further guidance to the experts to see how we can streamline the indicators to around 110 indicators. And yeah, there's a lot of progress around that. And maybe just to touch on the linkages from the global to the national, like for Kenya, our main implementation tool for our NDC and the NAP is the National Climate Change Action Plan. If you look at our action plan, the current one, we have 8 strategic objective areas because the current action plan, we added a strategic objective area on youth and children. And we made a lot of attempts to identify indicators under each of the strategic objective areas. If you look at the 7 thematic targets and the 4-dimensional targets under the UAE decision, you find that it is a sort of reflection of the global indicators and the indicators we have at the national level, because you look at agriculture, the thematic targets and under the GGA framework are actually those key sectors that are critical for adaptation. You talk of agriculture, you talk of water, you talk of health, and also in most national level priorities, you look at the NAPs, you find that the same sectors are also highlighted. And for Kenya, you have the example of what you are doing with the financing locally led climate action, where now we have 45 counties with the county climate change action plans that they generated after undertaking participatory climate risk assessment at the world level. So you still see these key adaptation sectors also reflected at the grassroots level, because under the county action plans that you have already interrogated, you find that agriculture is still at the core of the priorities. We have water and also environmental issues being really elevated. So you can see with the same sectors at the global level, at the national level, and the local level, you start seeing the linkages in terms of how those indicators at the local level can feed into the global level. Because like for Kenya, we'll be looking at the indicators of the actions at the county level, even as we do our national implementation status of the NCCAP, usually get priorities from the county level. So we consolidate these indicators to give us progress at the national level. And of course, as you report, as you are doing currently, we are doing our the first BTR report. You'll see all these actually reflected even in our reporting at the global level. I just want to emphasize also the linkages with the IPCC here, that one of the key areas we have been pushing as adaptation in negotiators is to have a very strong role of science in adaptation. And one of the best ways we are looking at is how can we have a task force on adaptation at the IPCC. As it is now, we have a task force on mitigation. And even in terms of the methodologies for tracking mitigation, the IPCC have the latest formula is 2019. So it means that the IPCC, in terms of tracking of mitigation, has very robust systems. And I think it's because of that task force and the focus on mitigation. And that's why I've been pushing so hard to have a task force on adaptation This is one area that we really pushed in Belém and also in UAE. We could not succeed. But what we have now is the IPCC did some guidelines on adaptation and resilience in 1994. Some guidelines on how to track adaptation, and there's a formula that was developed in 1994 by IPCC. From 1994, it was completely abandoned, and we are lucky that last year, I think somewhere this year, no, it was here, we are able to push through the IPCC to have IPCC now reviewing the 1994 guidelines in the next cycle of reporting. That when they do the 7th assessment report, they'll have a separate report on the guidelines that will really help us. So you are seeing there are several processes going on, and we look forward to really consolidating and coming up with one very strong methodology for measuring and tracking adaptation. I know currently we are talking about indicators, but when we started this discussion of operationalization of the GGA, of course, we wanted to have the indicators, the targets, the indicators, also metrics and methodology. And currently under the UNFCCC, we are not discussing the metrics and the methodology, but under the IPCC, what to expect them to come up with is to look at the indicators, metrics, and methodologies. And just to make sure that going forward, as we wait for the next GST under the Paris Agreement, we're going to have adaptation really well anchored, because in the last GST, really, we know not adaptation was not really captured as much as mitigation was captured, just because it did not have the targets, the indicators, the methodologies, and all that, really to give us a true picture of how we are doing in adaptation and resilience building. Thank you very much. Let me stop there for now.
Thank you so much, Laren Chen. We've learned, at least I've learned quite a bit from what you have been saying there. You and your colleagues, I think from putting the story together, one of the things that I tell you all really like is a string tying everything together is these linkages between how we measure adaptation at the different levels. And you took us there through the work that you're doing, especially at the global level with the IPCC, and the progress that you have made, but also what's lacking, where we could, we could do better globally. And it's clear that there is a lot of work that Lama can do to really feed into, to make sure that we do not break this string, these linkages at the different levels. Now I see we do not have much time. Actually, we are over time. So I'd like to ask from Edna what I should do now, because we are supposed to be having questions. I think from what we just had, it would be quite important to allow people to contribute, submit, to respond to what our panelists said. But let me seek guidance from you, Edna. How should we proceed? How much more time can we give?
Thank you, Dr. Maria. We can have a few questions. I saw Blessing had their hand up. So if there are a few burning questions, then we can address them before you welcome Dr. Gavi for the summary on way forward.
Okay, yeah. So Blessing, your hand is up. Please unmute yourself and yeah.
Thank you, everyone. It's Blessing. I work at APHRC. A lot of work already has been done, and I think the idea of building from below is very critical, because all the climate-based challenges, they are actually local. They are not happening in Paris. They are happening in our local setting. So this is a critical point. And as I listened, I've seen at least the link to the UN, the link to the national government. But I keep thinking that we have sometimes it's not a supply issue, it is a demand issue. Because you do all this work, create all these indicators, set up the platform, but the feedback to the communities, the implementing agencies, and local governments seem to break down. So that all you do, it remains, I think I've had learning platform. Yeah, it becomes a learning platform, but not really feeding into those who need the information to either make decisions or even make policies. So I think I wanted to highlight that and ask whether that is an area we need to emphasize. Deliberate feedback loops to different levels of implementers and practitioners, and so that what we do, because there are many local areas and each of them have peculiar challenges. So I wanted to raise that to hear your thoughts on how do we move forward with that in terms of making sure that that linkage is also there and is very functional. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Blessing. That's a key question. So our panelists, either Frederick, Carl, or Thomas, would any of you want to take this question? How do we ensure that we do not break this link, this chain, that the feedback that we get, we actually use it for implementation, for policy at the different levels that you are highlighting in your submissions? Carl, you want to take it up? I see you have your video on.
Well, sure. I mean, it's a great question. And oftentimes, you know, if there's a funded initiative that has lots of work and outputs involved, you got to wonder, well, how many of these are actually going to result in improved adaptation, you know, right? And so the relevance of this and all of our work relates to this question over how does this information that's gained and the learnings and the insights and all of that result in action at different scales and amongst different agents. And so, you know, one of the elements of this also is, you know, the term there's the term local, and then there's the term led, right? And that's where the normative issues over, you know, how is this something that's actually impacting people's lives, and how can adaptation be most impactful is important. So just one thing that Dr. Salim Huq mentioned before his passing was, what metrics are there for communities, for the, you know, and how are metrics used by the communities? I think that's another important insight, right? So I agree with the views that there needs to be a consideration over how this information goes directly to the people that actually need it. And the point on supply is valid to some extent. We have an insufficiency of resources, but we also have an insufficiency of articulation of them, right? And so not only is it going down, if you want to call it down, going to the local level, but also how do these stories go up is important. And how is this information also helpful operationally at the local and maybe the sub-regional level, right? So that we can, so it can be useful, as opposed to just be something that's on an internet web page and spreadsheet, right? So I completely agree, and I challenge Lama to really take these thoughts into account in terms of who are the people who are going to benefit and how do they need the information. I've spoken too long.
Yeah, you didn't speak so long. You are really saying very key things. I was like, actually, and you in fact talked about not just how do we ensure that the stories from the bottom get to the top, but how does that then also feedback again at the bottom, you know? So yeah, it's something that we have to think about, and you left the challenge to us, I guess. So the work is cut out, and so maybe the team would like to speak to that as well, because I don't see any other panelists. Dr. or Professor Lukorito's hand is up. Maybe you want to respond to that or say something else before I get to the team.
Well, perhaps, yes. Thank you very much, Mary. It's not just about, it's just reinforcing the fact that much as we are in this metrics indicator space, I think I would like us to prioritize our communities at the center of these issues. Even as we grapple with which metric, which indicator has universal acceptability, how are we using the locally led approaches, making sure that our communities are adequately tracking, adequately measuring their efforts in adaptation? Because that gives them a good head start in resilience building. The global issues can track and track, but these people must eat, must be food secure, must be healthy. Yes, their ecosystems must continue provisioning in the areas that they tap resources from them. I think that's key. So the work of Lama, I think I really acknowledge it, and note with concern that all this work may not be fruitful unless we are actually going to have this investment we are making visible. If this piece of good work we are doing is going to remain at webinar level, at conference workshop level, without a deliberate mechanism of making it more visible, especially to our IPCC authors, so put up a strong case that will support the aspirations of Africa through Laurentien's presentation, then we may not be able to be very happy in the end, because if they can't access it, remember, they can't put a case around it. The IPCC does not think for you. It will only go out there to synthesize the best available science on any matter and then give its opinion for policy guidance globally. So if these scientific facts are not visible, they are not out there, I'm sorry, we shall remain at top level for a long time. So ARIN should start right away. We are already beginning to see good practices here which need to be documented. It's a research impact network. So we want to see more of these publications in whichever form, so that our IPCC authors can actually get it. The work around updating the 1994 guidelines by the IPCC was a hotly negotiated position, I must say. Even for us as Bureau members, we had to intervene to have something around adaptation. So as we go forward, then we have this 7th assessment cycle as a platform. If we did our work right, then Laurentien's interest around a task force on adaptation can be negotiated in the next cycle based on factual evidence, which I think we have a case this time around to put together to support that particular interest post the AR7. And I think it is within our interest also as Bureau members to push that particular agenda. And remember, the global cannot think for local. It is the local to inform the global. And therefore, come up with solid metrics, solid indicators that are aggregatable, yes, at the global level to have our Africa's case onboarded. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. Yeah, I think the work of ARIN, you rightly put it to us, the challenge that's ahead of us, but I think we are really up to the task. And we are very, very interested in contributing to these global discussions. one of the reasons why we call this webinar, but of course, this is not enough. You highlight there that we must publish, we must make sure that we document this, this work in a solid way. So Edna, there is a question that came to the team, a question from Christine. So I don't know if any member of the team would want to take that. It's related to what we've been discussing, but a little bit different, because she asks,
hello, Dr. Maria. We lost you.
I think we've lost Dr. Maria. We could ask Dr. Gavi to give a quick summary because we are over time, so we can close.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much, participants. Thank you very much, participants. Thank you very much, our keynote presenters, for this particular event. It has been indeed a learning event where we have been able to showcase what we are doing as ARIN, and also we have also been able to receive some recommendations on areas that we need to improve on in order to ensure that what we are doing will feed into what the global platforms are doing in trying to address the issue of climate change. We have been able to learn that this Lama dashboard, actually, it is a peer learning decision-making platform that is going to showcase how the local communities are involved in the co-creation of metrics, in the co-creation of indicators that will effectively be used to measure and track the adaptation issues at the community level. We have been able to listen to Mary from IDRC, who emphasized the issue of the communities in even assessing the adaptation interventions. Dr. Lucorito also came in very strongly by emphasizing the need to co-create these metrics and also indicators, because this will help even in research and also investment. From this, even from also what Mr. Mokua and Mr. Lerenten have emphasized, that this work is very critical because it is feeding into already what is happening. But most importantly, then the issue of bottom up has come up, because now that even whatever is happening at national level or global level, that the Lama work will feed into that, and that will be quite very effective. I wish also to notify the audience that ARIN also has been part of the drafting the guidelines for the AR7, and these issues that are being discussed here also were part of the inputs that also were suggested even during the meeting that was held in Kuala Lumpur. And just to emphasize on what Dr. Lucorito has said, indeed, we are going to showcase this work through publications. And just to note that already one publication is already out. I think we shall be able to share the link to the publication so that we can be able to read it. But we continue even as we enter into now the data collection phase from next year, January. We are going to take into consideration some of the suggestions that we have gotten in this particular meeting, so that once, even as we go to collect the data, then we shall ensure the data that is being collected captures all these suggestions and recommendations to ensure that the IPCC will be able to use even the event of the AR7 report. So indeed, this learn, as we have said, we shall still continue different platforms because we understand even different African countries are going to revise their NDCs. And of course, this work is going to be very critical even in trying to help show that the aspects or the aspirations, the voices of the communities are felt, even as we revise all these particular documents that guide the climate change discussions at the local, national, and global level. Thank you very much. And then I take it back to Dr. Atela.
Thank you, Humphrey. I think I have no much to say. We have spent some good time in this conversation. I've just pasted our latest paper on Lama, or local adaptation metrics, looking at frameworks. I've pasted the link on the chat so you can access it there and read it. We should be sharing more as time goes. Thank you very much, everybody. I guess we can bring it to an end. We apologize. We've gone above the stipulated time. In the year 2025, we'll try as much as possible to really observe this time issue, because I know it's it's an area we need to improve on in our webinars. I don't know if you have any other thing you want to take photos. So
yes, please.
Okay.
We'd like to take a media screenshot. So if you're comfortable with your camera being on, kindly do turn it on so that we can have one final photo as a group.
Brilliant. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Nancy, when you're ready, let me know. You can smile so that the photo doesn't look so tied up.
Okay.
Okay. Nancy, you ready?
Yes, one more. That's that in Edna.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Good. Thank you, and Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to all of you.
Bye, Johannes. I hope
Thank you very much. And Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to all of us. Charles, I see you.
Thank you. Happy New Year and Merry Christmas. Let's re-energize it during the day. Thank you.